All right, and this is Loïs here, and today I have a very special guest, John from the John in Japan channel. I'm going to talk about John in a little bit, but just as for a little bit of news, I've had multiple interviews with multiple people. I'm going to make a podcast version of this show, of these videos. So if you go on Spotify or Apple, podcasts or whatever, there should be a podcast. I'm going to call it The Language Learner. I think it was. That's what I decided. But anyways, so today we have John, and John is not necessarily very famous for now, but he's an American who speaks pretty much, I would say, perfect Japanese. I mean, this is as good as it gets, pretty much. I mean, fluent by any definition of the word. And so the goal really of this interview, the overall goal is just going to be, I'm going to ask John, like, how did you achieve this? What was the process like, so that everyone watching this interview can benefit from this, whether you're learning Japanese or any other language. All right, so the interview is going to be in English, but I'm just going to ask the first question in Japanese, then I'm going to ask the same question in English again, just to establish sort of like the, what kind of level we're talking about. All right, John. So first question. まずは自己紹介とやっぱり日本語を勉強し始めた理由を教えてください。
はい。そんな紹介いただくとめちゃめちゃプレッシャーかかっちゃうんですけどでもはい。自己紹介をしていきたいと思いますが、そうですね。大学生の時にアニメがすごく好きで、その影響で日本語の授業を受け始めたんですけど、その授業を通して、ある人と会って、この人が後で僕の親友になった人なんですけど、その人との関係において日本に来る機会が与えられて、20歳の時に日本に来ました。で、そっから、本当に、日本語を勉強しまくったんですけど、その最初のきっかけっていうのはやっぱりアニメだったような感じがします。アニメ漫画ですね。はい、そんな感じです。
Right. So you guys can sort of assess what kind of level John is at. But for those of you who maybe you're not learning Japanese, it's pretty much just fully fluent. I would say pretty much native level. I'm not sure about like a native accent. I'm not really good with accents in Japanese, but this is really good. So John, can you introduce yourself this time in English and talk about what the sort of why you started learning Japanese?
Yeah, absolutely. So, what I just said in Japanese was basically that I was into anime when I was a university student. I took a class, met a guy, and that guy became my friend later on. And because of him, I was able to come to Japan and work and live here. So I've been here 11 years. I came when I was 20. I quit university. I dropped everything, and I just came to the country that I was fascinated by. And I've been here ever since, and it's been fun. It's been great. I enjoy living here a lot.
Just to be clear, so you've been in Japan for 11 years. So you're 31 at this point, which is really surprising to me. Again, I mean, you look like early 20s tops, but apart from that, you had been learning Japanese for like, what was it, 2 years? You said in your video. And after about 2 years, you were able to pass the JLPT N1, which for, people who don't know what this is the highest level of the JLPT. So this is Japanese Language Proficiency Test, the official sort of, national like test of Japanese for foreign people. And N1 is actually, I asked a bunch of native Japanese speakers, this is really hard. Like even for native speakers, it's like, some questions are a little bit dubious. So really, really high achievement. I'm going to be asking a bunch of questions to dive more into like how you learn Japanese, but could you give us an overview of what your approach was like in these first 2 years?
Absolutely, yeah. So just to be specific about the time, for my video, I said how I passed the JLPT in 2 years. It was 2 years and 2 months. Okay, I just wanted to keep it simple and provide some impact with the title there. So 2 years and 2 months of active study from the day I learned my first hiragana in class to passing the JLPT N1. Before I talk about methods that I was using, I would say that passion and love for the language were primary. Those were the biggest driving forces for me. And so, guys, I tried like every method on the market basically, and I experimented a lot. The ones that I found that really worked for me was first learning the kanji. So I learned the first 6,000. I'm sorry, I learned the first 1,000 common use kanji characters in about 6 months, and then I learned the next 1,000 in 2 weeks because I really got into the process of learning the kanji. I'm actually working on a video about how I did that in 2 weeks. So that was a big thing for me because once you know the kanji, you okay. So say you read a novel or a scientific article or something like that, and you don't actually know most of the grammar there. You don't know a lot of the vocabulary, but if you know the common use kanji, it's not going to be this overwhelming thing anymore. You're going to know a lot that's on that page, and so knowing the kanji early was really helpful. I worked through the Genki textbook series, which is one of the big names in the field. I think a lot of Japanese learners are going to be familiar with that name. That was good for just getting basic grammar, learning the syllabaries, for example, and getting a good sense of how it's spoken, like going through the audio exercises and stuff like that. So after building a foundation with Genki and the kanji, I used RTK, by the way, Remembering the Kanji, James Heisig's legendary book. After getting that good foundation, immersion via manga and anime and practicing talking to myself were the biggest factors, I would say, in improving my fluency. And I can talk about those in more detail if you want me to.
Sure, yeah, we're gonna talk about all of this in more detail, but the first thing I want to establish, because people heard you talk, but in terms of reading and writing, where would you say that you're at? Because I watched your video and you took a screenshot of the JLPT N1 like results, and in the reading section, I thought it was like reading comprehension, you got 100%.
Yeah.
And this was like years ago, right? So you've probably gotten better. But in terms of writing, what would you say is your level? Because I talk with Japanese people and they say themselves that when it comes to writing by hand, it's like sometimes, they just forget because they're just like typing on their phones and stuff.
Yeah, and you've been in Japan a long time when you can relate to that. So I can relate to that. So I would say the height of my ability to write the common use kanji was probably around the time of the JLPT and maybe a year or so after that. And I went to a seminary in Japan. A seminary is where you study to become a pastor, basically. You study the Bible. I went to a seminary in Japan for 4 years, and the tests were all written. Okay, so everything was handwritten. And I was able to write everything I had to write on the test. Basically, there were maybe a couple times where I had to use hiragana instead of kanji. But when you're studying something like the Bible, the kanji that you use are limited to some degree, right? They're going to be kanji that apply to that field. And so I got really, really good at writing the kanji that apply to that field, but I wasn't actively reviewing the kanji that I learned at that point. And so at this point, I would say my ability has certainly dropped as far as writing goes. So I can, if you give me a computer, I can write sentences, you know what I mean? But as far as writing by hand, my ability has certainly dropped a bit. Reading has improved, though, of course.
Yeah, yeah. It's kind of sad, but yeah, I guess if you don't use like your hand to write, it's just natural consequence. It's not really like you're not going to be lost in Japan anyways if you can't write by hand. But yeah. This is actually pretty impressive because I was under the impression that the seminary was like in English, but it was in Japanese, and I'm guessing that at least part of the stuff that you had to write and read about was a little bit, obscure, or I would say more very specific to religion. It's kind of the same story with me. Like I talk a lot with like the Latter-day Saints, so like the Mormons. Here in Tahiti, there are lots of them. And it's like they're required to learn French before coming here. And they gave me the Book of Mormon, obviously, in French. And I was like, okay, you're giving me this, but do you do you also read this? Because I started reading it. It was like, whoa, pretty hardcore stuff, right? Hardcore in the sense like the language use is pretty somewhat arcane, and I don't see how an American person who's been studying French for like, I don't know, not even like max 2 years could possibly understand this. But they were like quoting, passages from the Book of Mormon and stuff in French, reading it fluently, highlighting stuff. So I guess there's something about just, yeah, I don't know, just like being into religion and learning language through that is pretty effective, or just reading in general.
Absolutely. I think I would actually recommend the Bible as a learning tool for anyone, even if you don't, even if you're not religious. And just to be clear, I currently don't affiliate with any particular religion or sect or denomination or anything like that. But I still love the Bible, and the reason it's such a great resource is because you can get it for free, for one, and you can always get the audio. You can always get the audio. And if you know the Bible to some degree, like if you grow up in Western culture and you know some of the stories, you're going to be reading a story that you already know in a foreign language with the audio. And that combination of having a bit of the background and then listening to a native speaker read the story, that's a very good way to learn a foreign language. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I definitely recommend it.
Are we talking about like listening while reading, or just listening on its own?
Exactly. You could do both. Listening while reading first, perhaps, and then maybe just listening on its own when you're washing the dishes or
Right,
cooking
right.
or taking a walk or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, I've talked to Professor Paul Nation last week. I'm sure some viewers have listened to this episode. He clearly said that listening while reading is actually pretty beneficial. You tend to get, higher vocabulary retention and so on. But yeah, I also do a lot of just listening, like repeatedly listening to the same stuff over and over again. I suppose not everyone wants to do that. I'm maybe a little bit obsessive or, passionate, I guess you could say. I do this with Netflix, actually. Like movies that I've watched in English, I just listen to them like again and again, either in Japanese or recently in Italian. I'm going back to learning Italian. I managed to find a way on my iPad to put on Netflix, and then with some sort of trick, I just turn off the screen and then put it back on and press play and then turn it off, and then it just plays in the background. So anyways, I can talk about that in another video, but it's kind of a trick. Anyways, so yeah, really going over the same material over and over again is hugely effective. Now I want to talk more about Genki, or let's say textbooks in general, because Genki is like at this point, pretty much like the official textbook for Japanese learners. Could you describe how you use Genki, and which did you use all of the books?
Yeah, so there are two, as far as I know. At least at the time I was studying, there were two textbooks and two corresponding workbooks. And now they have a bunch of graded readers, and there might be other resources that I don't know about. But I just devoured it voraciously. I mean, that's the best way to put it. One thing that I did that was maybe a little bit unique is I would often jump ahead. So I would be reading through the Genki textbook, and I'd be like, okay, this chapter is getting a little bit boring for me. I wonder what chapter 16 is like, And I would jump ahead to chapter 16 or whatever. And it would be way too hard. I wouldn't understand most of it, but it would be interesting. It'd be exciting. And it would be like, okay, so this is where I'm going to be. If I continue studying hard, this is where I'm going to be in a couple of weeks or in a month or whatever. And that would get me excited. So I would kind of just jump all over the place with Genki. I didn't use, people have asked me before, I didn't use any flashcards. I didn't use any flashcards.
Interesting. Yeah.
I just worked through the book, worked through the workbook, wrote a lot by hand, listened to the audio like a madman. And I would film, even from, not day one, but I think it was the first couple of weeks I was studying Japanese, I would film myself recording Japanese. So I could give an example of what that would be like. I even remember specifically one of the videos I did. So I hope I'm on screen. So I would say, for example, このリンゴはこのリンゴより大きい, or something like that. That means this apple is bigger than this apple. And I would film myself saying that and acting it out. And so I took a very active approach, I guess you could say, to the book. I didn't let the book dictate how I would learn it. I dictated how I would learn the book. And I think that helped it stay fresh and interesting.
Right. Yeah, because it can definitely be a bit dry for a lot of people. Although I guess Genki is a little different from it's not really just grammar. I think I never went through Genki. I used some other method, but there's also some cultural notes and stuff like that, right?
Yeah, yeah, those are very useful as well.
But yeah, I guess the bulk of the Genki textbooks is about grammar. And so would you say that this was, at the end of the two Genki textbooks and the workbooks, was that enough to get a great grasp of Japanese, or was this not enough?
It was a good starting point, I would say. So by the time I came to Japan, I hadn't worked through both of the books, but I was maybe like a quarter of the way through the second Genki book, I think.
Hmm.
I can't remember exactly. And I had I could make small talk. I could have very simple conversations. I could ask someone where the station was or whatever, stuff like that. And I think I had a greater understanding of grammar than I could actually use. So my passive understanding of the language was bigger than my active ability to use it. It's a good start. It's a good start. But obviously, if you want to pass the N1 or something like that, you're going to have to learn a lot more.
Right, right.
Yeah.
I just want to put the pieces, back together, like in terms of like the timeline. So you went through Genki, so you got to Japan. So when you got to Japan, you'd been studying Japanese for how long? About 6 months?
No, no. When I came to Japan, it had been about no. Okay, close to 6 months, 4 or 5 months, I guess.
Yeah. Okay.
5 months. 5 months. I came in February of
Okay.
2023. No, 2013. I'm sorry. Um,
So yeah, it's only natural that at that point you were not 100% functional with Japanese. But then, was there a moment? I guess I'm specifically thinking of like the listeners trying to think like, okay, how long is it going to take me before I can get to at least a conversational level in Japanese? Not necessarily like John, like super fluent, but at least have basic conversations. Is it like, would you say a year, year and a half, 2 years?
okay, so for me, there's this. I talk about this in my JLPT video too. There was this one day where I felt like I had reached that point. It was literally a day. So there's this idea of a tipping point, right? Or the straw that breaks the camel's back. And I think that that's a real thing with language learning as well. So you spend all this time learning vocabulary and grammar, and there's this point where that all starts to come together, and you feel like you can express yourself fluently. So for me, that was about. Once again, this is just a rough estimate. This was a long time ago, and I wasn't taking any records, but I would say it was about a year
Hmm.
into to studying. But I mean, you got to keep in mind, I was in the culture. I was immersing myself daily, reading a bunch of manga, watching a bunch of anime, studying like crazy, So, but yeah, it took about a year, I would say.
Right, right. I'm sure a lot of people are asking themselves at this point, like, okay, this is great, but I don't have, like, I have a family or whatever. I can't just go to Japan from one day to the next. So, how big an advantage do you think you had by, just going to Japan? Is this something that you could potentially reproduce at least 80% by just staying, in the US at home, trying to get as much input as possible from, listening and reading? Do you think this is possible?
I think the biggest advantage I got from being in Japan is the sense of necessity that comes with that. So
Mm,
if you don't learn the language, you're not going to be able to make friends. Um, and if you're interested in, for example, romantic relationships, you're not going to be able to have a girlfriend. You're not going to be able to have a boyfriend. Your career opportunities will be greatly decreased, diminished. So I think in that sense, the biggest advantage of being here is the sense of motivation and urgency that you get from it. As far as just exposure to the language goes, though, I mean, this is a great era to live in, right? Because you can literally get on YouTube or listen to a podcast and you can hear natives have a conversation. You have access to free online resources like textbooks, even and stuff like that. So as far as exposure goes, I think anyone can get that exposure.
I see. Yeah, yeah. No, definitely, because like motivation is usually the limiting factor. I would say for a lot of people, including myself, it's not necessarily, well, time is also limiting, but yeah, it's mostly motivation. Then I wanna talk also about Remembering the Kanji, which is the book that you use to learn the 2,000 or so kanjis that are necessary to read Japanese. I suppose you could learn a few hundred more, but these are really like the essential stuff. So how did you use Remembering the Kanji? Did you just go through the book, or I suppose you did not use flashcards, as you mentioned that. What was the experience like?
I apologize. I need to clarify there. I did use flashcards for kanji. So I didn't
Okay.
use
Okay.
flashcards for vocab or
Vocab.
grammar. I
Right.
did use
Right.
them for kanji. Um, so yeah, I'd love to talk about RTK. So I think I already mentioned that this might have been when we weren't recorded, but I went through the first 1,000 kanji. There are 2,136 common use kanji characters, by the way. I went through the first 1,000 in about 6 months because I was doing it while I was doing Genki. Okay, so simultaneously.
Okay.
And then I don't even remember what happened, but I just decided to focus entirely on the kanji, and I learned the next 1,000 in 2 weeks. And during that 2 week period, I was only learning kanji. Like that's all I did with my free time. And I'm gonna make a video on this, but if you want to learn 1,000 in 2 weeks, you have to learn 71 to 72 a day. That's a lot of kanji to learn per day. But you can learn. I think you can learn a kanji in 2 minutes, a new kanji in 2 minutes, if you are familiar with James Heisig's method. And so
Yep.
71 to 72 kanji a day, 2 minutes per kanji. That's like a little bit less than 2.5 hours. Add an hour of review, you're at like 3.5 hours. Yes, that's a lot of time. Yes, that's a big time commitment, but it's definitely doable. I mean, people can put in 3.5 hours. Some people can. So remind me of your question again. What
Yeah,
was your
I was
specific
just
question?
asking what the experience was like, so that was a pretty good answer actually. But yeah, it's true. I never thought that it was possible, but now that that you're doing the math for me, I guess it checks out. So you did actually do the James Heisig, like use mnemonics and like make stories out of every kanji, right?
Oh yeah, oh yeah. And this is something that I won't talk about in my video about kanji because it's kind of more personal and it's not directly relevant. But I would like to mention it here. I got to this point where it was almost a psychedelic experience, and I'm not even exaggerating, because you're there. I'm not a very creative person. I don't do a lot of creative. I'm not an artist or anything like that. So you're there day after day, and you make 71 of these little stories. And I got to the point where it was a reaction. So, I'm sorry, a reflex, right? So you go to the doctor hits your knee with a little hammer, and your foot shoots out, right? Like a reflex. So I would look at a kanji, and I would look at its meaning, and the story would just pop into my head, kind of. I got to that point. And so I would spend 3 or 4 hours a day just in this imagistic world, and it would just be story after story. Some would be gruesome, some would be filthy, some would be inspiring, some would be sad. You're going through all these emotions and all these images. And so for me, it was almost like a psychedelic experience. And I still remember at the end of those 2 weeks, I broke down in tears. And I don't even know what kind of tears they were. Like it wasn't sadness for sure. There was some joy there, but it wasn't pure joy. It was just like, I don't know. I think it was just such an intense experience that it had that kind of effect on my body and mind. Yeah.
Yeah, this is fascinating because I'm one of these people, who learn Japanese, but I have made the deliberate decision to put kanji on the side because I just thought, like, I mean, going through, remembering the kanji, that's feasible, I feel, but then as soon as I learned, pretty early on that actually you need to learn the kanji, but then there are tens of thousands of like possible combinations of those kanjis, and they don't have like the same reading depending on the word that they're in. I was like, oh man, I just want to talk to people. I mean, I guess it feels a little bit incomplete and wrong not to learn, kanji, and I'm definitely leaving something on the table. But if it can save me, a lot of time, then I'm gonna do it. But now you're sort of giving me the inspiration I needed to maybe get into it. Which I guess if you're, I'm at a level where I can have conversations like pretty easily with Japanese people. But in terms of reading, it's like, unless it's like very basic stuff, I'm just like, look, I don't know. I don't know what this is, right? If I don't have like furigana, then it's game over. So this is really interesting. Yeah, you wanted to say something.
I would like to talk a little bit more about that. There are different schools of thought on this one. You might be familiar with Wanikani, which is this program. It's a great program.
I'm aware of it.
It's a website, and with Wanikani, you learn with mnemonics, imagistic story mnemonics. So it's the same as Heisig in that sense. But you're also learning basic readings, and then you're learning vocabulary as you do that. So that's a cool program. But I personally still advocate learning with RTK because you can knock out the kanji pretty quickly with RTK. And once you get the meanings down, I talked about this a bit before, you're not going to be as overwhelmed by complicated texts. And for me, that just gave me this huge sense of achievement, and it really created momentum for me. And then after you learn, so you might say, well, how can I learn the readings, right? In Japanese schools, Japanese kids actually learn readings for each kanji, right? So they'll get the kanji, the onyomi
Right.
is this, the kunyomi is this, there are different readings. I never took that approach, ever. So for me, it was all about reading manga. And I talk about this in my JLPT video, because manga has furigana, like you said, right? Which is the hiragana or katakana that explains the reading of the kanji. And so you're reading through manga, and you're going to encounter these words, kanji, and you know them all, right? You've learned them, you know them all. So that's going to be a huge boost to your motivation. And then you're going to start to see, oh, in this context, in this combination, this is how you read it. Oh, and over here, this is how you read it. And you might even encounter the same kanji on two different pages. And on one page, it has this reading. On the next page, it has that reading. And if you're interested in that, I think naturally you're going to start picking that up if you immerse yourself enough. And I personally do advocate, like, honestly, if you have the liberty, like if you're not in a class, for example, where you have obligations to learn grammar and vocabulary, if you're not in a class, I'd say focus on RTK. I think it could be done in a month, to be honest. If you're highly motivated, and if you spend 3 to 4 hours a day, you can do the whole book in a month. And so if you have that, if you're fortunate enough to have that kind of time and motivation, I'd say knock it out as soon as you possibly can, and you will not regret it.
Right. And I believe there is a second RTK, right? Teaching the more like rare kanji. Did you go through that book too?
I think that might be the third one. I think the second one teaches the readings.
Right, right.
And then the third one goes into like the next 1,000 or whatever. I never bought the third one. I did buy the second one, and I did try it a little bit. It just didn't really mesh with me. I don't know. I can't even remember the method for that one. But I ended up just going to the manga. And no, I haven't done the third one. I've picked up some other kind of rare kanji along the way, but honestly, unless you're in some like specific field that uses a bunch of rare kanji, or if you just love kanji and you just want to learn a bunch of kanji, I don't think you really need to do the third one.
Okay. Yeah, it's very surprising that you managed to learn. So RTK is not surprising, but then just using manga, and so with furigana to help you acquire all of the like each word essentially. This is actually, it sounds very pleasant because in my mind it was like, if you want to learn Japanese, there are, let's say 10,000 words that you need to learn, and then they all have like a specific combination of kanjis. So there's no way in my mind that was the way I thought about it back then. It's like you need to drill this into like Anki or whatever. Otherwise, it's like there's no way that you're gonna remember them all. But you're a perfect example that no, you can just read manga, and I suppose maybe it's gonna take a little bit longer than if you like actually put them into Anki, but it's a lot more pleasant, certainly.
Yeah, and it's hard to say, it's hard to put a time frame on it, because like I've personally found that if you isolate things too much, it might give you the illusion that you're learning it optimally. But I think that when you read manga or something like that, you're not just learning the kanji, right? You're not just learning the readings of the kanji. You're brushing up on your grammar. You're learning new vocabulary. You're learning how to use Japanese colloquially. You're picking up on all these different elements of the language. And then you go and you listen to your textbook, or you go and watch a YouTube video in Japanese or whatever. And all of these things combined are actually giving you the review and the learning that you need. But you're not taking a tally, right? Not like, oh, I learned one reading, I learned 10 readings today, I learned 100. You're never doing that. You're just enjoying the process. And before you know it, you actually realize, oh, I kind of know a lot of this stuff. I mean, that's how we pick up our native languages, right? It just kind of
Yeah.
happens naturally over time. So it's hard to say. I'm not saying that you shouldn't do flashcards. I mean, for some people, that's probably the best way to go. But I think a kind of an organic immersion approach is also pretty effective, and it's fun.
Nice, yeah.
So,
You're the perfect example of this. But so just to go back on the timeline, so after 2 years and 2 months, you passed JLPT N1 and you got a perfect reading score, which shows that you perfectly acquired kanji. So I know this may be a little bit of a hard question, but in terms of like reading manga, how much time would you say you dedicated to this, like daily or weekly?
that is really hard to say. I don't know. Man, there would be times where I would read a bunch of manga, and there'd be days where I wouldn't read at all. Um, yeah, it's tough to say, And I think I didn't talk about the Bible at all in my book about the JLPT because I thought that was just kind of not as accessible to a lot of people. But I
Right.
did read the Bible every day, and the Bible generally
Okay.
has
Yep.
furigana as well. So that was something I read
Uh,
daily.
like
Uh,
100% on all kanjis, or is it just like on the hard kanjis?
it's on all the kanji. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
okay. Yeah, that's nice. Wow.
yeah.
Okay.
Because it's made to be accessible to all people, right? Of all ages. So the
Yeah.
Bible's a good resource in that sense. If you get it on your phone, though, you might not have that benefit. I'm talking like a paper Bible.
Yeah.
You might
Yeah.
not get the furigana on your phone or whatever. So yeah, it's hard to say. I'm sorry, I can't put a good estimate. I
Yeah. No,
will say
it's
though,
yeah.
that the 2 weeks leading up to the JLPT, and I do talk about this in my video as well, but during the 2 weeks leading up to the JLPT, I read through 10 volumes of Naruto, and that's all I did. And that's actually not a ton of reading, because manga, it's pretty lightweight stuff, but that's all I
Yeah.
did. And as you said, I did indeed get 100% on the reading. So there was something about that I think helped me a lot.
Would you say that the manga helped more, or is it more the Bible?
Once again, that's a really tough question. I don't think I can come up with an answer that I feel comfortable with. I think they both helped. I think all the reading I did helped probably. Um, the thing in common between manga and the Bible is that I was interested in their contents, right?
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think that that's what you want when you're working on reading. You want to be interested. And I had a guy comment on my YouTube channel saying, I've struggled with the GLPT. I've taken it several times and I failed. One of the issues is because the material, the content in the reading section is not interesting. And I think that there's a lot to that. For me, though, I was very interested in the reading sections of the JLPT. So picking something that you're interested in, I think helps a lot, for sure.
Yeah, yeah. And talking about specific, like how you did it specifically for manga, because I did get some manga like on my Kindle, which I think is great because you can, there's no, they don't need to like ship it to your home and stuff like that. It's less expensive, but then you get the furigana, but then it's like written so small. I mean, I don't know if it's just my Kindle. Maybe the new ones are a little bit bigger. But do you like? Did you use like a Kindle or like an e-reader? I guess it's called, or is it like the paper format?
Everything was paper for me for those 2 years.
Okay.
Now I do use a Kindle now, but yeah, everything was paper.
Okay, yeah, yeah. The Kindle just makes it a little bit more like I feel like for manga, it's not really great. Like the furigana is just too small.
It's pixely, isn't it? Like the little characters are kind of
Yeah, you have to
pixelated.
zoom in and yeah.
Yeah. No, I know what you mean. Yeah.
But I want to talk more. So the reading, I get the sense that you did a lot of it, but it was not necessarily. It didn't feel like a chore. It's more like you just read stuff that you were passionate about. So in a sense, it doesn't really count as like studying, which is great. But in terms of listening, what kind of work did you have to put in? I suppose being in Japan, you got a lot of listening in from just people talking to you, but was there something else?
Um. Okay, so two big things that I can think of. One of them I talked about in my video. One of them I didn't. So I'll start with the one I talked about in my video. Anime. I just watched a ton of anime, and this is the same as manga, right? It was never like, oh, I'm gonna work on my listening. It was like, I really want to watch One Piece. I really want to watch Naruto, and I would just watch that. And I would use English subtitles for the first year and a half or so. But I would try to ignore them as much as possible.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing, and this is something that I thought about after I made the video, and part of me wishes I would have included it. Um, this also ties into the fact that I was in a church, in a religious setting. I would wake up every morning and I would go downstairs at like 6 a.m., way too early. And the pastor that I was living with, he's a Japanese guy, he would come down and we would have a prayer meeting together, basically, or a prayer session, I guess you could say. And this pastor happened to be very eloquent, very eloquent. He had very beautiful Japanese. And that's not true of every native speaker, right? You get that with English as well. Like,
Yeah.
I'm not a very eloquent English speaker, for example. But this guy was, oh man, just beautiful Japanese, very clear pronunciation. And this guy would pray for 10, 20 minutes every morning. And I would sit there, and I didn't understand most of what he was saying, but I would sit there and I would listen to him. And the thing about prayer is that you often use the same types of words, right? So every morning I would hear these phrases, this guy saying these phrases over and over and over. And I think that that really helped me pick up a sense of the flow of the language, the accent, the intonation. And another thing about prayer is that it can be very emotional. So he would really invest his passion and his emotion into the prayer. So I had this special privilege of listening to emotionally charged native eloquent speech every morning. And so I would say, that's something that you can get online. Like, just go. It doesn't have to be prayer, obviously, but just find some emotionally charged, like, passionate speaker that you like, and try to expose yourself to that. I think that was a big factor for me, for sure.
Right. Yeah. I always think that when you're at an early stage of learning Japanese or any language, just listening to the language, how it's spoken, it definitely helps you in terms of getting a sense for, pronunciation and listening. That's definitely going to help you later on. And as well, what you said about this guy being very, well spoken. I mean, he talked in a way that appealed to you. It's I think this is hugely important, right? To have some sort of model that is just like captivating, because when you're interested in someone when they speak, I don't know, there's something about just content, like when you listen or when you read, when it's interesting, you just acquire it faster. So, but now I guess we're blessed with all the YouTube and Netflix and stuff. We can just find that pretty easily.
Yeah, yeah. I'd love to pick up on something you said there. So you're talking about having a model, right? Someone that you're interested in. I've found from experience, this was when I first noticed this was fascinating for me. I pick up new Japanese more quickly from non-native speakers speaking Japanese. And I think it's because there's this emotional charge to it, right? So if I see a non-native speaker who's really good at Japanese and they're using a word that I don't know, I think, man, I better learn that word. They know it. I
Right.
don't know it. Oh my gosh. And so who you hear a word from, I think is definitely, it's an important thing that a lot of us don't often think about. So I think you brought up a really good point with that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's fascinating. Yeah, and I suppose different people are motivated by different factors, but I feel this has been a huge issue for me because I'm learning Japanese, but it's not like I think a lot of people learning Japanese are passionate about anime, manga, or Japanese culture. But for me, it's not necessarily the case. I guess it's not that I don't like it, but I do watch anime, and I want to talk a little bit more about anime because I'm sure a lot of people are wondering what where you watching. But yeah, for me, it's like I find it very difficult. Like for English, for example, this is a language I had to learn, and I was watching. I remember one of the first things that I was watching in high school was The Big Bang Theory, and it's not. I don't remember actually. Is it hard? I don't think it's particularly hard, but I remember just listening to this and already sort of built up a certain level, in school, but my listening was just terrible because I'd never done any listening, never talked to anyone. And I just thought, man, the way that they speak, it's like so cool. I just want to talk like that. And I think this is a huge factor in like just acquiring the language. And with Japanese, for me, it's like I just don't feel this way really because I don't know. There's just such a huge because like I'm a French speaker, watching American TV series, like it's much more relatable in a sense. With Japanese, it's like I watch stuff and yeah, it feels exotic and stuff, but I feel like some part of me has really a huge. It's really hard to relate and feel like I want to talk like this guy or whatever. But anyways, that was just a long rant. I wanted to talk about yeah, anime. So what kind of what's your favorite animes?
Okay, so Naruto was my ultimate favorite. So this is when I started watching I started watching this one in English. I can't even remember how old I was. I must have been maybe in high school or something like that. Started watching that one in English. I don't know. I just liked it. It was a cool anime. I can't remember exactly when I switched over to Japanese, but there was some point where I wanted to see the next episode and it hadn't been released yet in English, and so I switched over to Japanese. Naruto was a big one for me. I dabbled in One Piece a little bit during my first couple of years. Hikaru no Go. I don't know the English. It might just be that in English too. It's about an Ego player, a kid who plays a board game.
Okay.
Basically, that one was really cool. Death Note, Bleach,
Yeah.
kind of
Great. Yeah.
kind of like just the big, the typical shonen anime were pretty much my favorites at the time. Since then, I've watched a wide variety of different anime, but those were my favorites for sure.
Do you still watch anime?
I do. Lately I've been getting more into drama, like with actual people, because I think you can pick up different words from drama, kind of a more natural way of speaking.
Yeah, 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 definitely.
But yeah, Vinland Saga is one that I've really enjoyed recently. Vinland Saga, I think it's on Netflix. It's a Viking anime, so that's kind of cool. Sousou no Frieren. I don't know the English name for these guys, but yeah, that's another good one. Yeah, I dabble in anime a little bit.
Nice. I also watch anime from time to time, but really struggle to find stuff that I like. I think my favorite could possibly be I guess Gintama. I really like Gintama. I don't know if you've watched it. It's
Yeah.
I feel like it's not really popular outside of Japan. I'm not really sure. This is like yeah, I don't know anyone who watches Gintama actually, but yeah, I like it.
That's a fun one.
So yeah, it can be pretty complicated though. I guess for if you're trying to learn Japanese, it's pretty fast paced and just unexpected events at any time. Um, so the next question was going to be about oh no, wait, I was going to talk about flashcards, but first we're going to talk about the JLPT because some people on my channel are interested in this obviously because the JLPT is sort of it's like you need to be at least like I think it was what was it like N2 JLPT N2 to get into what was it like university or get a job. Do you think that like the N2 is sufficient to study in Japan and work there?
It depends on the kind of work you're doing. Like obviously if you're working at like a convenience store or something like that, N2 is fine. I got the JLPT N1 because it was a requirement for my seminary. They didn't accept applicants with an N2 level. So there might be, I don't know, I've never studied at like a university per se in Japan, so I'm not quite sure about that. But I think a lot of places might require N1. N2, like even for me, N1 was just the start in a sense. And I don't want to discourage people with that. I don't mean that in like in a negative way, but there's still so much to learn even after passing the N1. And so, yeah, bare minimum, maybe N2 is sufficient. But if you can go for N1, I'd say go for it for sure.
Interesting. Okay, because I get the feeling that a lot of people feel like N2 is somewhat, achievable, but N1 is like, wow, you need to be like so good. But you're saying that this is a good start, but did you get the feeling that after getting the N1, you were still somewhat struggling, I guess? Because my own experience, obviously I didn't pass the JLPT because, I mean, you need to learn kanji and stuff, and I don't really have a use for it anyways, but I guess my observation has been that learning Japanese now, I can understand conversations like pretty easily, but it's so weird because when it comes to like very specific content, like I watch videos about like Japanese, I don't know, like science or politics. It's like my level of comprehension just drops dramatically. It's I'm not really sure what's happening. Do you feel like you had a similar experience even after N1? And what is your current situation right now?
Okay, that's a good question. I think even in our native languages, there are going to be certain areas that we can't comprehend very well, right? So you mentioned politics, I think, right? So if I go and listen to a politics thing, even in English, there are going to be some phrases and words that I probably don't understand very well. So that's going to be true even in one's native language. With with Japanese, I would say with the N1, I was equipped well enough to be able to learn advanced topics, if that makes sense. So obviously, I didn't know all the biology terms and the physics terms and the politics terms and stuff, but I was well equipped if I wanted to go learn about politics in Japanese, only using Japanese. I could do that. If I wanted to go deeper in my knowledge of biology, I could do that only in Japanese. So I think you do get that level of achievement with the N1. But yeah, even now, I mean, there are so many things that I want to learn still that I haven't. You know, science is one of those things. So yeah, it's a lifelong process, I would say, learning a
Yeah,
language.
definitely. But so you don't find yourself like nowadays in situations where I don't know, someone's talking about something and you're just like completely lost in what the person's talking about.
No, no, not no. I'd
Right,
say with
right.
the N1, I was at the point where I wouldn't be completely lost. And I ask people all the time, what does that word mean? And what does that word mean?
Okay.
So I try to be honest about my ignorance, but I can definitely follow and I'm able to ask the questions that I have to ask if I need
Good.
to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And so,
Yeah.
how much do you think your level has evolved, like from after the N1 up to right now? I guess it's been, was it like 8 or 9 years?
9 years.
Yeah. Did you get like
Okay,
a lot
so
better?
yeah. So there are two things that I picked up since I passed the N1. So after passing the N1, it was, let's see, I passed the N1 in December of 2014, I believe, and then I entered seminary in 2015. It was April 2015, and for the next 4 years, I studied ancient Hebrew, ancient Greek, Koine Greek, and ancient Hebrew. So I invested all my time studying those two languages. I studied them in Japanese, so that gave me an opportunity to continue to use Japanese, but I didn't actively study Japanese as a language anymore for the next more than 4 years, actually. And, this is a trap that I think it's possible to fall into when you pass the N1, and this is something I regret a little bit. When I passed the N1, in reality, it was like a start, like I said before. But in my mind, I was like, okay, I'm basically fluent, you know?
Yeah.
I don't really have to focus on Japanese anymore. That's one of my regrets. So what I did pick up in seminary, though, was how to use polite and honorific language. Because I grew up, the first 2 years I was in Japan, I was in a church, and I never really had to use that kind of language. But in seminary, you're surrounded by these teachers, and there's this whole culture of, there's like a hierarchy basically, right? Like even in a seminary. And so the teachers, you have to use honorific language with the teachers, and then you can use casual language with your classmates that are like your same age. But even if they're your classmates and they're older than you, you have to use polite language. And like, so I really got a sense of how to use which type of language. And then I graduated seminary, I became a pastor, and I worked as a pastor for about 3.5 years. There's a little bit of an overlap. So the last year I was in seminary, it was an internship. So I was working as a assistant pastor for a year while I was in seminary. And so this whole time I wasn't actively studying Japanese. I was using it all the time. I was giving sermons in Japanese. I was preparing sermons in Japanese, but I wasn't actively studying Japanese. Now here's where I picked up the second thing. So I quit my job as a pastor after 3.5 years. I moved to where I am now, which is a rural part of Japan called Tochigi. And when I moved here, I discovered 3 YouTubers that drastically kind of changed my perspective. So I'll give you the names. So the first one is Nick Channel. So Nick Channel. He's a phenomenal speaker of Japanese. He's also from America. He came when he was 14. He's my age. Amazing. Just amazing speaker. And then there's Matt versus Japan, which you mentioned. And then Dogen, which I think a lot of people know. He does Japanese and videos in Japanese with English subtitles. And the thing that I picked up from these guys was that they all studied accent actively. And I thought, man, I had never studied accent. I had never studied accent in all the years I'd spent learning Japanese. And obviously, I had picked it up to some degree, just naturally. But I realized, accent is my weakness. I need to actively study systematically study accent. And so that's what I started doing then. I've been doing that for about 2.5 years. And so those are the two things, accent and using polite language. Those are the two things that the two areas I've really grown in since passing the JLPT.
Interesting. Yeah. First, on the topic of polite language, for people listening to this who are not learning Japanese, this may not be particularly relevant, but yeah, there's definitely in Japanese sort of a different language used depending on the level of politeness, and just the way that. Also, if you're learning from anime, I feel like, yeah, you really need to probably just watch something else from time to time. Even for me, like I because I never make use of like polite Japanese because I'm never in those kinds of situations. I just talk with Japanese people like on online or on Skype. And just yesterday, I was talking to a Japanese person, and like it's not even like about polite language, it's just the way you say it. I tend to say, apparently, I never noticed it, but instead of saying like "do desu ka ne," I was like "do desu ka ne," and then the person on the other side of the phone, she said like, well, it's fine like with our conversations, but like if you ever say this like to another person, you should probably say like the full version, "do desu ka ne." But yeah, just an example of how perhaps like if you're American or if you're speaking in English, it's not as important. I guess there's less of a sense of like hierarchy. But yeah, in Japan, it's pretty important. And then you mentioned, accent. Specifically, are you talking about like pitch accent or just accent in general?
Pitch accent, yeah.
So this is definitely something that I have not studied, and I'm not sure how. I mean, I don't necessarily feel like this is a huge problem for me, but at the same time, my goal is not necessarily to sound like a native speaker. My understanding of the issue is that with pitch accent, this is if you don't actively put some effort into noticing and studying it, this is not something that you're going to be able to acquire for the most part. So how good would you say your current Japanese is like in terms of pitch accent? Because I mean, I'm not at the level where I can totally assess your accent, but you sound pretty good.
One of the main compliment I get on my Japanese from native speakers now is that it sounds good. It sounds like a native speaker.
Yeah.
And you got to keep in mind, Japanese people are very, I mean, they'll tell you, if you say arigato, they'll be like, jozu wa sugoi. You say one word in Japanese and they're like, that's amazing. But I do think that it's improved a lot. I'm by no means am I at a native level, but at least I'm aware now of where I don't know the right accent. So I'm at a point where, okay, so I like to make, and we might talk about this later, I suppose, but I like to make flashcards with audio now. I didn't do this. I didn't make any flashcards, as I mentioned, during the time of the JLPT, except for kanji. Now I like to make flashcards with audio. And if I don't have access to the audio that I want to use in the flashcard, I use AI text-to-speech. And I'm at the point where I can listen to the AI and I can discern whether or not the accent is correct. And I use it's called Listener, I think. That's the text-to-speech I use.
No way.
And
I use
there are multiple voices on there. And oh, okay. Yeah. Very cool. It's great. It's a great tool. There are multiple voices on there. And so what I've noticed is that some voices get certain accents better than others. So, right. For example, there's a woman's voice, and she does a great job with negative forms of adjectives. So she gets the accent right on negative forms of adjectives. And one of the guys on there, the male voices, doesn't get those right.
Okay.
But then if I want to do like a yojijukugo, which is like a 4-character compound word, one of the male voices gets the accent on that better. So I'm at the point where I can judge whether or not accent is correct, but it doesn't always come out right. And so I often have to correct myself. And sometimes I did an ad-lib video, a 10-minute ad-lib in Japanese on my channel. The only comment I got on that was that there's one word, yurai. I was saying yudai. It's actually yurai.
Oh, right.
I was saying that wrong. So I mean, I think it's decent, but not perfect.
Yeah. I can definitely relate. I do make some mistakes in terms of pitch accent because sometimes it's not even that I don't know what it is. It's just that if I don't listen in like carefully, I can't even tell you what the difference is between the different pitch accents. But I'm going to do like a shameless plug here of my piece of software that I'm developing. I mean, it's not even a shameless plug. I mean, it's my podcast, so I do whatever I want. But and I wanted to get your opinion on this actually, because I was using Listener, not as a user, but I used the API, so like their software essentially to. I'm building a flashcard application. It's called Fluent Falcon. It's like Anki, so think about like Anki, but the main difference is that it's 100% audio based. So basically, it's based on my experience of like I mainly want to get conversational, and so you make the flashcards, and instead of reviewing them in Anki, or on a screen, you just download an MP3 and you have all of the reviews. So for example, like you input, like you have a bunch of words in Japanese, and then the audio is just going to tell you, okay, how do you say hello in Japanese? And then you have a few seconds and just think in your head, like, okay, what was it? Like, konnichiwa, okay. And then you hear like the response generated by the Listener AI in Japanese. So that's the principle. It's like Anki, but 100% audio. Obviously, in terms of like learning, reading and writing, that's not the goal. But would you say, do you have any like suggestions in terms of like how to improve this? What's your overall impression?
It sounds like a great idea. I think that if anyone out there is using Anki, for example, or any flashcard system with no audio component, I would say like start using audio this second. Like the moment you hear this, like go to your deck, add audio. Having audio is vital to learning a language. I would say this is just my personal opinion on that. Your app sounds great. The only thing, I think personally for me, I would want to have the target language come first. Also, like I would want to have both types. So it would be cool to have a type where it's like, how do you say this in Japanese? But I would also want a type where I just hear it and then try to comprehend it, conjure up an image for it. I would want to have both ways. I would personally, I think I would use an app like yours just for fun and stuff. I would like to have text though, which is why I do like Anki, to some degree. But yeah, well, I think you're onto something.
This is like the second step, I guess, because you have the app and you're listening to the audio, and sometimes people just want to get like even if it's audio, just read like the transcript or what the sentence or the word is. But yeah, this is definitely a good idea. But just in terms of still on the pitch accent thing, and just in terms in general of pronunciation and accent, how did you, like you mentioned that you started deliberately focusing on this? What did you do exactly?
So I picked up 2 books. One was they're both in Japanese, unfortunately, but one is on accent in general, pitch accent, and the other one is on intonation. And I'll just give you, I thought this was so cool when I learned it, so I'll share it here. There is a difference between accent and intonation. So accent is the pitch that is inherently present in any word that you have. So say you have a word like hashi. No. Let's do ame. Let's do ame, which means rain, right? So ame starts high and goes down. Ame. Okay? So that's the accent of ame. But you could say in casual Japanese, is it raining? By just using that word and then adding a question mark at the end, right? Is it raining? But the way you would say that is by, you would retain the accent, ame, but then you would go up at the end, right? So ame, right? Ame. And then, okay, so say you have a word like ame, which is like a candy, right? So that one goes up, starts down, ame, okay? If you wanted to say a question with that one, you'd retain the accent once again, but in order to suggest that it's a question, you would exaggerate the accent. So it would be ame, is that a candy? So that's basically what I studied with these 2 books, was the difference between accent and intonation. I got an overview of the 4 accent types in Japanese. There are 4 of those. I got a sense of how, when you make a sentence, how accent works when you connect words together. And then from there, I would just focus on accent when I learned a new word, and I would try to guess at the accent. Oh, this must be a high pitch accent. This must be a middle pitch accent. And then I would just use my accent dictionary, which I have on my phone, to check if I was correct. So that's kind of the approach I took.
Right, and I think like in Japanese, like Asian languages specifically, where like if you're learning Chinese or Thai, people always talk about how hard the tones are. And in Japanese, it's like the first book I got on Japanese, which is, by the way, it's for those of you listening to this, it's Asimil Japanese. I mean, it's like a French book. There's not as much emphasis, if any at all, on accent, and certainly not, pitch accent, which is sort of a trap because there are definitely like words where multiple times I've had this issue. Like when I talk to Japanese people, it's like, okay, well, it's understandable, but you didn't use the right pitch accent, and this is stuff that is so, I guess, subtle if you don't pay attention to this, that you're not going to, like, if you don't pay deliberate attention to this, you're not going to learn it. Was this also your case? Like, you didn't pay attention to pitch accent in the beginning. Did you make these kinds of mistakes?
Oh yeah, oh yeah. I made a lot of mistakes with accent. It's funny because I went back to the Genki book. I actually I do some Japanese lessons now. If anyone's interested, I might be able to fit in a couple more. I do teach Japanese to foreigners, and so I'm using Genki again. And I went back to Genki and I was like, is there anything in here about accent? And there's this like little section in the introduction. It must be, it's like a paragraph long, and that's it. That's all the coverage you get in Genki. So
Yeah.
no wonder I didn't, worry about it. Um, I think my accent was decent because I was doing a lot of. Your accent sounds pretty good, by the way, too. Um, Probably because you're listening a lot to the language. I would imagine so. And it
Yep.
was the same for me, right? I was listening a ton. I was trying to copy how it sounded without. I wasn't aware of accent per se, but I was trying to sound like the audio on my in my textbook and in the anime and stuff like that. But yeah, there were plenty of times where people would correct me. They'd be like, "That's not how you say that. This is how you say it." So yeah, and even to this day, it's certainly less frequent, but in some very rare situations, people are like,
Yep.
the accent of that is wrong. Yeah.
I guess, well, fortunately, I don't feel like it's a huge issue. Most of the time, people are going to understand what you're saying, but yeah, it's a small problem. Now, yeah, you wanted to say something on this?
Well, I would just say, like, no, I totally see where you're coming from, and I think that's a reasonable approach. I would say if you can, if there are any beginners out there, Japanese beginners out there, just learn the basics of accent. You just look on Google or whatever, just learn the basics, and then you won't have to really focus on learning accent, but you'll be aware of it at least. And so when you learn new words, you can say, okay, well, what's the accent of this word? And
Yeah.
that can just be part of your learning process. So the earlier you study it, the better.
Yeah. Oh, and by the way, you mentioned that you were doing some tutoring for Japanese. I'm going to put a link to this in the description on YouTube or whatever platform your people are on. Are you teaching on, is it like italki or these kinds of sites?
No, I just do kind of a personal thing with. I
Okay.
hope I don't get a bunch of requests because I'd probably be overwhelmed by that, to be honest. But yeah, just a couple private. I do like what 4 or 5 private lessons a week or something like that. Just 40-minute lessons, kind of short lessons, just on Zoom.
Cool.
I'll just
Okay.
send the link and we do a lesson there. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
not my
sure.
main thing. So I mean, if people are really interested, I'd be happy to do it. But my main thing right now is kind of working on the YouTube channel.
Oh, okay, good. Yeah, actually, I wanted to talk about that. This was the next question. In terms of like work, you mentioned that you had to do the seminary and all this. Did you have to use your Japanese for, I don't know, like a job or stuff like that in Japan?
Yeah. So seminary was totally Japanese. I was the only. Oh no! There was a Brazilian guy who joined. I think 2 years after I was there, and there was a Taiwanese woman as well. I was
Hmm.
the only native English speaker there, so everything was in Japanese in seminary. And then I was a pastor at a Japanese church. Once again, I was the only Westerner there, native English speaker
Yeah,
there.
I mean, I
And
have to interrupt you there because, I mean, like a white pastor at like a Japanese church. I mean, what did people think of that? They must have thought like, what is going on?
so it was a big church. There were about 200 people in Japan. This is big. In America, this wouldn't be big. There were about 200 people in attendance every Sunday, and I was the assistant pastor. So it was so big that
Okay.
there were three of us. So there was the main pastor who was Japanese. There was the Taiwanese woman I mentioned. She was the other assistant pastor, and then I was the second assistant pastor. And the people in the church had already known about me because I was part of this denomination, this group, and they had seen pictures of me, and I'd written stuff that they'd read and stuff like that. So they were happy to have me. They were very gracious people, and I built a lot of good relationships there, and it was a good experience. I really enjoyed it. But yeah, it was all Japanese. So I would give sermons every week in
Nice, yeah.
40-minute, hour-long sermons in
Crazy,
Japanese.
wow.
And just my personal style is I don't like to read manuscripts, so I would just I would write a manuscript, and then I would reduce it to a bullet list, and then I would just kind of go from there. So that was good practice for me, although I wasn't doing it as practice, but yeah, it turned out to be good practice.
Yeah. And so apart from the church, did you have to use Japanese in like a job setting?
I mean, that was my job technically, right? I was getting paid to do that, of
Yeah.
course. I'm an English teacher. I don't have to use Japanese in my
Right.
job, but I do. I do use Japanese in my job. And just for anyone who's interested in like having a career in Japan, knowing Japanese, even as an English teacher, is definitely gonna help because they asked me to be a manager during my first year there. I declined, but one of the big reasons that they asked me to be a manager was that I knew Japanese and I could kind of really facilitate communication between the Japanese staff and the English speaking staff. So yeah,
So this
not
is like
necessary,
teaching
but
in the
yeah.
in the what do they call them, like conversation school, eikaiwa or
Eikaiwa, yeah, English conversation.
Oh, okay. Okay. Nice. Wow. So you got so much exposure. I guess the eikaiwa is you're speaking more English, but before that at church it's like wow, so much practice in the form of, being a pastor.
Absolutely.
Um Now, I want to talk about just, we've talked a lot about how you learn Japanese, but if you had to go back, I'm trying to put myself in my listeners' shoes. It's like, for most of them, they're just at home. Most of them, let's say between 20 and 40. Maybe they're going to college or maybe they have a job, so they don't necessarily have like a lot of time to dedicate to Japanese, but still they want to make the most out of the time that they have. And it's okay, I guess, for them not to get like to your level in 2 years, because obviously, if you can't put in the time, it's hard. But how would you go about learning Japanese, or I guess any language for that matter? Let's say you have, I always ask my guests, it's like you have an entire year, but in this case, it's going to be, you have some like you have maybe a family and stuff, and you have a full-time job. How would you go about learning a language then?
I would say I would devote at least 10 minutes a day to learning vocabulary and grammar. And I'm really speaking from the perspective of someone who has, like you said, a lot of other responsibilities, right? So at least 10 minutes. I would want to do at least 10 minutes of learning vocabulary and grammar per day. I would put the vocab in a Anki deck, and I would make sure I have audio for everything. And personally, I like to have a one-to-one relationship between the target language and English. So if I learned Inu, for example, I would just put dog. And obviously that's a simple one, right? Sometimes you have to add, sometimes if you look at a dictionary definition of a Japanese phrase, it's this like long explanation in English. I would try to make that as concise as possible, make sure that it's just this one-to-one relationship. And I wouldn't worry too much about getting the exact meaning of that word, because the way you build up your sense of a word's meaning is by exposure to that word in a variety of contexts. Okay, so I wouldn't worry too much about that. I would just do a one-to-one relationship. So I'd work on my deck every day. And then in the evenings, it could be whenever, but I like to do this in the evenings. I would try to get a bunch of audio in my iTunes library from that language. So I would use audio from textbooks. I would use podcasts. I would try to get different levels too. So it wouldn't all just be this easy stuff. There'd be some intermediate stuff. There'd be some advanced stuff. And then every night before I went to bed, when I was cleaning up or doing the dishes or whatever, I would put my library on shuffle. I would just shuffle and I would just listen. And I would listen with the intent to comprehend. And I think that that's really important when you're listening. You don't want to just kind of sit there and just zone out, right? If you want to improve your listening, you want to listen with the intent to comprehend. And I think that you could, that's like what? That's 10 minutes a day on vocabulary and grammar, 10 to 20 minutes perhaps doing immersion at night. I think that, if you really dedicated yourself to that every day, um, you'd get pretty good at that language. It's going to take a while, obviously, but I think you could get pretty decent at the language by doing that. Those would be like the bare bones of
Yeah.
what I would do. Yeah.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
this is great. And in terms of listening, I think even like more than 20 minutes because like you're paying attention, but you can do it while you're running or doing the dishes and stuff. So this is what I do all the time. Like just today, I was listening for maybe the fourth time, like to it's kind of weird, but what is the title in English? Is it the Great Gatsby with Leonardo
Yeah.
DiCaprio? Yeah, I like this movie. I realize that people are sort of some people don't like this movie, but I was listening to it in Italian and then in Japanese, and it's so weird just listening to Leonardo DiCaprio just speaking Japanese. But I just it's so interesting. It's just it's so great, and listening to it multiple times, you get the chance to understand things that maybe you didn't pick up the first time. But yeah, now I want to talk more about not necessarily language related stuff, but a lot of people watch my channel for they wanna probably maybe like go to Japan at some point. They're interested in the culture. What is it like? I think like the biggest differences between the U.S. and Japan.
Ooh, that's a tough one. I think there are so many differences that I'm just not actively aware of anymore because I've been here for so long. And I had this sense the other day when I was watching a drama in Japanese. It felt so, like you mentioned how with some anime you watch, you don't feel like you relate a lot. I was watching this drama and it just felt so native to me. So I was like,
Mm.
man, this feels so familiar to me. I just had that sense. So my vision might be blurred in that sense, but I would say the thing I mentioned about the hierarchies in Japan, that was a big one for me. So I think the way I think about the world has changed because of learning honorific language in Japanese. And you're always the thing about being in Japan, of course, like in America too, or I suppose anyway, of course there are different levels of politeness that you can use with people, right? Um, but in Japan, it's like everyone you meet, you're always analyzing: are they older than me? Are they younger than me? Are they in a higher social position than I am, or lower social position? And you kind of have to shift your language, change your language depending on the person. So that was a big difference for me. Um, what else? I mean, honestly, I think that's the main one that's worth mentioning from my perspective.
Yeah, I suppose maybe you're used to this at this point, but just being American and being in Japan, I suppose I would assume that people are always surprised, like listening to you speak Japanese. Maybe they try to speak English to you at first. What is it like just interacting, like, because you're deeply like embedded in Japan at this point. You're not like a tourist or anything. Do you find it hard to just being in Japan, like being a foreigner in Japan? Do you feel hard to? Does it feel hard to like be in a community and making friends and stuff?
Not at all. Not at all. And I don't want to speak for all foreigners because I do think that Japanese people view different foreigners in different ways.
Hmm.
In general, they're very hospitable, I would say. So I don't think you have to worry about that per se. But for me, I've been very fortunate. I've met a lot of good people. I think being in a church probably helped a lot with that because there is a culture of compassion and hospitality to the foreigner and the stranger, and that was a good start for me. But yeah, I moved to Tochigi, like I mentioned recently. It's been almost 3 years now, and I haven't had any trouble making friends here. So yeah, they're great people, and if you speak the language well, it's much easier to have meaningful relationships. So
Yeah, yeah. I always thought about that because in my case, I only went to Japan like once. It was a few years ago. It's kind of like the back then at least it was the sort of the opposite problem where I go to Japan and it's like I don't I would assume people don't think I'm a foreigner. They would think, yeah, it's just a Japanese person. But then when they speak to me, it's like, sorry, I don't speak Japanese. At least back then. But yeah, I always wondered about just what's it like being a foreigner in Japan because this is a fairly rare case. I would say they're not so. I mean, apart from like Tokyo and maybe Osaka, then um, That's interesting.
Yeah, yeah. And I might add that there are some advantages too. You can take advantage of being a foreigner if you want to make friends and acquaintances here. I'll get this all the time. Like I'll be on a bus to work or whatever, and there'll be some middle school kids or whatever, and they'll try to use some English. Hi, how are you? And if you're open, if you like people, you can start a conversation with them. I've had so many conversations. I've made like there's an app in Japan called Line. It's like a
Mhm.
messaging app, and you can add people on it and stuff. And so I've made so many just random acquaintances here and there just from that type of interaction. So you can definitely take advantage of being a foreigner if you know the language to some degree.
Nice, nice. Yeah, I also want to talk about your experience working as an English teacher because I feel like my understanding from reading Reddit and stuff, which is the ultimate source of truth, obviously, on the internet, is that this is a common pathway to Japan, at least for English speakers. Um, Obviously, your case is a little bit different because you spoke fluent Japanese getting in, but there are plenty of Americans or English speakers getting in, just like totally just native speakers. What has been your experience like doing this job?
Yeah, so it's been a good job. I like teaching, so that's been cool. For me, it's kind of just the natural thing for me to do after quitting my job as a pastor, and it's not what I want to do for the rest of my life. I want to really focus on content creation and stuff like that. And I would like to talk about my kind of mission statement for my channel at some point. But yeah, it's an easy way to come to the country. You can get if you have a college degree. You do need a college degree in most cases, but if you have a college degree, you can get an English company to pay for your plane ticket. They'll set up housing for you. You'll get a you'll get a decent salary. It's nothing. You're not going to be rich, living in luxury, but it's enough to get by. So if you want to come here and immerse yourself in the culture, I mean, you have a college degree. It's pretty easy to do that actually these days. You can get a visa very easily. So I do encourage people who are interested in experiencing life in Japan to just if just come try it, you know, and see what it's like. If you don't like teaching though, and if you don't like the English language, I think it is going to be a source of stress for you. But if you enjoy that type of thing, definitely take
Yeah.
advantage of that.
And so, in terms of teaching, is it like more private lessons kind of situation, or is it group lessons?
Both, both. I'm taking a break from work now to focus on YouTube. But when I was teaching, I'm going to go back to teaching again pretty soon here. But I was doing what was it, 32 lessons per week? I think you can teach like 40 lessons per week if you want. 32 was enough for me because I was doing work on the side. But 32 lessons, 40-minute lessons. Some of them were group lessons. The biggest group was eight kids. I taught adults and children. And then we did like private, like one-to-one, man-to-man with adults as well. So a wide variety, and we did all kinds of stuff. Like there are textbooks made by the company that I work for, which is Nova, by the way, if anyone wants to know. Nova, Nova. There are like TOEIC, TOEFL resources,
Mm.
Eiken, which is like a standardized test for Japanese speakers in Japan. That was like who want to learn English. That was another resource we offered. So yeah, just a wide variety of stuff like that.
Yeah, 32 lessons. Yeah, it sounds pretty, a little bit intense, I guess. I mean, I don't know. I was a teacher too. I mean, it's different because it was like I was not teaching. Well, actually, I was teaching English and math, but it was like the sort of classic just school situation with a classroom. I only had it was like middle school and high school. It was 30 students, but wow, it's intense. Yeah, but
When you first
yeah,
start, yeah, you get used to it. You get used to it.
yeah. Anyways, yeah. So I want to talk a little bit about your channel because it's fairly new, but you did manage to get some good momentum right from the start. What is the sort of the plan for the future for the channel?
So I haven't released my mission statement yet, but I do kind of have a mission statement in mind, and it might change a little bit over time. But basically, what I want to do is I want to equip foreigners to be able to not only live but also thrive in Japan. That's like my main goal. And that includes learning the language, of course, but that also includes becoming familiar with the culture. It includes personal development. So learning self-control, for example, mastering yourself, self-improvement, all of that. And I had some experience counseling as a pastor. So three and a half years roughly of counseling. I'm not a clinical psychologist by any means. I don't have a degree in that field, but I do have some experience with that. So I kind of want to really involve all of those elements into my channel and help people who want to come to Japan and live here to thrive here and have relationships and build families and all of that. And one of the reasons I want to do that is because there's an issue with aging in Japan, right? The population is aging and the birth rate is pretty low. And so we need foreigners. We need more foreigners here. And I don't want foreigners coming here who don't appreciate the culture and don't love the country. I want people who love the culture, love the country, and are willing to, devote their lives to living in the country to come. And I'm here to help facilitate that. So, you know what I mean? Eventually, I want to get to the point where I can help people get visas. I can introduce people to my Japanese friends, help them learn the language, pass the JLPT N1, learn the kanji, all of that stuff. So that's kind of what I'm going for. And so that's what I'll be working on for the next, however long it takes.
Nice, yeah, because I think most people don't realize how hard it is to adapt to a new country. I mean, I've had this experience of I went to college in Switzerland, in the French-speaking part of Switzerland, so it's not even like a language problem. But yeah, I really felt like in the beginning it's kind of different because it's like all new, all exotic, and you had, sort of romantic ideas about the country. But very quickly it just fades away and you're just faced with the harsh reality and the harsh winter. Certainly for me coming from Tahiti, that was not a really good aspect of Switzerland, but definitely if you can be like sort of a facilitator for this transition, it can be hugely helpful, especially for, I guess, like Westerners going to Japan. That's quite a change. It's a huge talking about this. I suppose you were, maybe it was a little bit easier for you because you were in a community of the religious community. So did you feel at some point like homesick, I guess, being in Japan?
I never really felt homesick. Even to this day, I don't feel homesick. But I did, and I can't get into the details on this because it involves another person, but I did have the hardest 2 years of my life during my first 2 years in Japan. The hardest 2 years and maybe the best 2 years simultaneously. I don't know. Very stressful, very difficult situation, a lot of tears, a lot of negative emotion, anger, hatred, even of stuff that I had never even experienced before in my life, resentment, stuff like that. But I got over it, and so it wasn't necessarily because I was in Japan per se. Like I said, there was a personal element to that and a relationship element to that. But yeah, so I definitely, I know that it can be tough to come to a new country and to just enter a new situation in general. So I forgot exactly what your question was.
It was like, were you ever homesick or
Okay.
yeah, going
Sorry.
to Japan, yeah, the transition.
Yeah. So not homesick, no. But yeah, I went through a really tough time where I wanted to leave, but I didn't want to leave Japan. I wanted to leave that place that I was. In Japan. I wanted to go to a different place in Japan, which is one reason I entered seminary, actually. Part of that was kind of getting away from that turmoil, I guess you could say. So
Yeah. Man, this John, this interview has been great. I mean, so much insight into stuff that very few people have. I mean, being American in Japan and being so embedded into the language and the culture, it's so exceptional. Is there anything that you want to talk about that perhaps I forgot to mention?
I think we've covered everything. Yeah, I did want to talk about my channel a little bit there, and I was able to do that. So yeah, I think we've covered everything.
Yeah, sure. I'll put a link to your channel in the description or in the comments, and also for the link for the tutoring as well. So, John, thank you so much. This has been great, and good luck with your channel.
I really appreciate it, Lois. You're a great interviewer. I enjoyed it a lot. So I hope we can meet again.